Instead of recognize students from, what exactly to expect the projects of such nature being.
All right, greetings everyone. Let's get started. I'm Salim Ali. I'm the chair of the Department of Geography and Spatial Sciences, and it's my real pleasure to welcome you for this unique seminar opportunity that we have thanks to a grant from the American Institute for Pakistan Studies. And this grant was aimed at helping to build consensus around riparian development in Pakistan, which is a very contentious issue because Pakistan has rivers which are shared with India, our bordering country, that of course is currently geopolitically a very stressful situation for both countries, and there's a history of conflict. And also, economically, Pakistan is going through some challenges as well. So this particular project that the grant was focused on was along the Ravi River, and it's the largest riparian development in the world currently being planned. So it's also significant globally. Pakistan, with over 200 million people, of course, is a major country demographically. With lots of challenges and adapting to climate change and so on. So we had a workshop in Pakistan, which was in partnership with Beacon House National University in Lahore, Pakistan, that happened in September of last year. And this meeting is kind of the other end of the effort to get a scholar from Pakistan, one of the faculty members from the university, Beacon House National University, to come here to Delaware and share with an American audience what can be learned from this. So building that bridge of knowledge and learning across the two countries. So we're delighted to also have this in partnership with the Disaster Research Center, and our moderator is the Director for Research at the Disaster Research Center, Professor A.R. Siders, and she's also the co-director of the Jared Mangone Climate Change Science and Policy Hub. Yeah. And also a professor in the Biden School of Public Policy, as well as in our Department of Geography and Spatial Sciences. We're also delighted to welcome Professor James Westcote, who is a renowned architect and urban planner, historian, social scientist who has worked in South Asia for much of his career. He's the Aga Khan Professor Emeritus from MIT. And it's a real joy to welcome him, especially as an MIT alum myself. It's great to have that connection with the Beaver community. The other guest speaker we have is Ramaz Hasnan Sandhu, who is on the faculty of the Rafia Hassan School of Architecture at Beacon House National University, which is one of Pakistan's prominent and emerging private universities, which is in Lahore. He did his own studies, undergraduate studies there at Beacon House National Universities in architecture, but it was a very intensive program. He told me how, I had to work for 40 hours sometimes straight with coffee breaks.
And we don't need to tell architecture students that, but it's
Yeah. And then he got his graduate studies in architecture at the Politecnico in Milan in Italy, which is one of the leading institutions for architecture and urban planning. And he did his degree, I think, in urban design and urban policy design. Yeah. And he's also been affiliated with UNESCO's Policy Innovation Lab, and he can tell you more about that as well. So without further ado, we're going to start off with Professor Westcote's presentation, and then we'll have Ramaz, and then Professor Siders is going to moderate. So I'm going to move over to the PowerPoint right away, and over to you. Yes, please. Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much, Professors Ali and Siders. It's wonderful to be here at the University of Delaware, which I've followed the Department of Geography and the Disaster Research Center really since my graduate student days. And so to visit you now is terrific opportunity. I thought I'd start with this image from the Ravi River in Lahore after the devastating flood in 1988, because this will be our case study area for the seminar this afternoon. But then to set the stage for this type of situation, I thought let's zoom out. We have the larger seminar topic of design for riparian disasters in the global south. So, okay, that's very broad. Let's go to it then. First, next slide. If we take the CRAM MDAT disaster database and plot the flood losses, both in loss of life and persons affected, for the Americas, south of the United States, Africa, and Asia, by country over the period 2000 to 2025, you see how dramatically the Asia region stands out. And to some extent, this is what you expect, given the populations of India and China and their size of these countries. But nevertheless, this is really quite dramatic. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see that this longitudinally also plays out in interesting ways. These are subregions of Asia. So zooming in on the Asia region, the subregions, the pink portions of the bar are South Asia, and the blue is East Asia. So you see that the flood deaths, South Asia is standing out. Flood affected East Asia, more significant but declining. So these are really interesting patterns. And if we put flood losses in economic terms, which are not as good quality data, you find that the economic losses are increasing as sometimes the loss of life has fortunately been decreasing. Let's zoom in further to the South Asia context. It's of special interest to us in the next slide. And these are four country plots, data plots for the flood affected populations. Again, same period, 2000 to 2025. And you start to see some interesting patterns. In three of the four countries, flood affected populations are increasing. India slightly decreasing, but the y-axis is so large in India that it's still an enormous number of people flood affected in that country as well. But you'll also see that some of the frequencies and magnitudes of events vary, so that in Afghanistan, just by example, you have a higher frequency of flood events that are devastating. In Pakistan, by contrast, on the bottom right, lower frequency but higher magnitude episodic mega floods that are standing out. Now, it's worthwhile, those mega floods are so significant on the plot that our 1988 flood, that's the case study here, doesn't appear. It barely, it's a millimeter of that above the x-axis. So that just puts it in perspective as to how large some of these devastating floods can be. So let's go to a number of issues with this whole approach of using a global disaster database to try to get a handle on what the issues are. There are three issues that come to my mind that are quite serious. The first one is the classification, disaster classification. First of all, it distinguishes natural hazards from technological hazards. That means that all the water pollution events, spills, M&I types of pollution that are characteristic of cities like Lahore are not going to show up in the flood hazard data. The natural hazards are further distinguished so that I did the plots for floods under hydrologic hazards, but what about droughts and what about storm-driven events? What about climate change? These are not part of this classification system. So we have some real limitations in working with single variable types of classifications of riparian disasters. And the alternative to that is something that the geographer Danish Mustafa has called hazardscapes or hydrohazardscapes. He says, really, these are the types of more common phenomenon of multi-hazard disasters that produce complex emergencies. And so I put them as, whoops, go back one if you would, as the 6 Ds. Deluge or flooding is just the first, but in the same river where you have flooding, you have depletion, you might have degradation from pollutants, you have disease from the waterborne diseases related to the above, and then displacement of populations, both by disaster, by other types of social processes, and then the development processes themselves can be sources of vulnerability. So when all of those converge, as they do in the horror, in this case study context, then you really do have a very complex problem. The third thing that's missing, though, is the role of human action in either amplifying the disaster and losses or attenuating and mitigating them through what Gilbert White called the range of choice. Now, how many are familiar with Gilbert White's research? Okay, now that's one is you have 90% too few. So all of you, who's with the Disaster Research Center?
These are mostly from the landscape architecture program, but there are a lot of the disaster ones are online. There are a lot of them are online.
Well, I'm thrilled to have the how many landscape architects there?
Yeah.
I can't tell you how happy that makes me, since I did my research in LSU as a landscape architect, and my studies began there, where we were really concentrating on terms of deltaic sustainability. Anyway, if you had, and even as landscape architects, you really should be aware of the research of Gilbert White as somebody who was the pioneer, founder of floodplain management in the US, worked with the Roosevelt administration originally, and the whole field of floodplain management came out of a lot of the work that he did, arguing that the type of Corps of Engineers structural responses to flood hazards were inadequate. And that there were many alternatives that were being neglected. And particularly Gilbert was concentrating on the non-structural alternatives. So that included zoning, it included evacuation, warning systems, other types of social practices that can reduce vulnerability to disasters. He went from flood hazards to the whole array of hazards. So he is to the natural hazards field, what in your domain, Quarantelli, was to technological disaster research in the Delaware context. So these are two really key names for the landscape architects to also be tracking.
And we do have, I think, DRC people online. We have about 30 people online.
Okay,
So they are
great.
there.
Yeah.
And also we.
If they don't, I will have words.
Yeah.
I'll introduce them to our Quarantelli library later.
Yes.
And I'd love to see it, because we literally, as I say, in graduate school, these are the people that we're reading as formative for the whole field of study. And but what Gilbert, coming out of a policy analysis field, did not concentrate on was the role of design alternatives. So what's the role of environmental design and the types of difference that it can make for disaster risk reduction? So let's go to the next slide and see here in the types of seminars that I would teach in the MIT School of Architecture and Planning, seminars on disaster resilient design and studio projects in that type of context as well. We distinguished 6 types of disaster resilient design, starting out with the types of anticipatory design, where you're trying to build from the start in ways that are going to be resilient. Secondly, but much more commonly, are the types of retrofit situations that you face, where you have an existing community, existing environments that are vulnerable, and you're trying to make them less vulnerable. A third situation, sadly, is that of recovery and reconstruction. Those historically were 2 separate types of subfields. The specialists in the relief and recovery would oftentimes say to the designers, look, you come later under reconstruction. Immediate response is really a specialized field of disaster recovery, but that's increasingly changing as designers are getting involved right from the immediate events onwards. Voluntary relocation, displaced people to safer locations. This is usually the last resort. The last thing you want to do is dislocate people from their places of dwelling. And partly it's a last resort also because it's been done so poorly and oftentimes so inequitably that people who are relocated and resettled, it's done so in ways that really make them very much worse off than they were. But increasingly it's recognized that this has to happen in a lot of places. And a lot of people want this option as well. And I'll give a case study, design case study that illustrates how it can happen. And the kind of the founder of our program at MIT, the Al Khan, with the communities that he works with in the mountain areas, increasingly saying some of the mountain environments are really so hazardous that the relocation option has to be considered.
And we have some people from Chitral and Gilgit also online, because this program was, we advertised it to the STEM Sisters program, and so some of them are there.
John watched that. That's great. Commemorative designs. Okay, so now the range of choice matters a lot. That's what Gilbert taught us. But the domain of choice also matters. And so in a complex river basin like the Indus in Pakistan or Ganges Brahmaputra in India and neighboring countries, you can distinguish four major domains or contexts that are going to have different types of challenges. That up in the mountain headwaters, you've got one set of challenges. You come down to the irrigated plains, a different set of challenges. In larger metropolitan centers, yet again, a new challenge, and then down in the more coastal and deltaic environments. I'll give one design example for each of them, and then I'm going to hand over. So first topic, we'll go up into the mountains. And this is a case of, if you go to the next, there we go, of a village down in the floodplain here in Tajikistan is facing the whole array of both annual and then longer term hazards. Annually, you've got avalanche, you've got rock flow, you've got mudslides, you've got under drainage problems. People would describe when the rain comes and the rocks start coming down the hills, we're terrified. And then longer term, you've got glacial lake outburst floods as a hazard. The climate change and deglaciation types of questions are really pressing. And so they said, we really want to consider the possibility of moving. Let's go then to how we would work with a village like that and the Aga Khan Agency for Habitat, and stress that that agency has worked with this village and others in the valley for decades. So it's got a very strong, close relationship. They've done lots of baseline studies, and we were building on what they had done through interviews and field studies in the village and surroundings. So next slide. Lots of mapping and transect analysis to understand existing settlement patterns, types of kinship relationships in homes. There's a special type of Pamiri house type, the Pamiri chief house type that's relevant here. Next slide. Okay, so here's where they want to move. They're down in the floodplain here, and they want to move 300 meters upslope to this plateau. It's public land, so that it's available, which is a huge asset, but it's 300 meters up, semi-arid, without a water supply. And so the design challenges were as follows. First, we had to generate some design alternatives for improving access. The next slide will show that access was both for herders and their animals on the one side, and trucks and facilities as well. Next slide, and the alternatives unfortunately are down at the bottom of the screen, getting cut off a bit. I'll just mention the water supply was the biggest challenge. There were possibilities of gravity flow, the possibility of an inverted siphon. It's the most promising, and then pumping would be exorbitantly costly, and then emergency water trucks as well. Next slide, please. Some of the home arrangements up on the plateau, once one could get access and water, were shared and discussed with community members to both to generate the alternatives, but then also to consider which ones will be more or less attractive. And finally, this last question of what would be the attractor that would help to bring community members and have them feel that they were really at home. And community buildings were designed and rendered in ways, this is what we call conceptual design. And the result of it was that the community was so enthusiastic, and the Aga Khan Agency also enthusiastic, that they want to go to design development. That goes to a higher level of, specification to see what the feasibility could be. Okay, now we'll go down to the plains, the irrigated plains I spoke of. And there we looked at some early modeling of the potential effects of global climate change in the Indus River Basin system, which is one of the most largest contiguously irrigated regions of the world. And so this model, which is a optimization model built by the World Bank, we were able to bring in climate change scenarios to that and jointly run them. There's a whole array of alternative ways of thinking about the results of that analysis. But the deficiency was, in the next slide, that the model time step and spatial resolution was insufficient to deal with any of the riparian disasters that we're talking about. So we had to do a completely separate model analysis and have parallel modeling approaches to address those riparian disaster risks. And the reach of the Ravi River that we're looking at is down here at the bottom of this study. But it just goes to show us what some of the challenges are of multi-scale types of risk analysis. Final example, or a concrete example of a design studio that we had was down in the coastal plains of Gujarat. And in that context, communities, these small villages like the one that you see on the right of about 1,000 members, many of these villages are located at the junction of a stream and a road crossing. So that was the historical rationale for village settlement in much of India. But they're going to be vulnerable to certain types of flood patterns of the streams that they're adjacent to, but then also drainage problems as the village develops. So similar types of consultation, community-based mapping approaches, and transect analyses by students in the field. And the next slide takes us to, okay, so then one team says, okay, we'll concentrate on some of these stream flooding issues and the alternatives there, both for wet flood proofing as well as relocation of more vulnerable services, and building bridges that wouldn't wash out, weirs that would serve a successful function. So that was one team. The second team is looking inland at the drainage problem, because in India now, if we go to the next slide, we have an extraordinary commitment to bringing tap water, drinking water to every home by 2025. But that increased tap water supply is going to bring increased drainage and gray water drainage. And that then results in a big soupy mess if you don't know how to drain properly. So getting ahead of that, the team developed a whole philosophy that we call Gur, Gully, and Gao. Gur means home, Gully means lane, and Gao means village. So you work stage by stage, because most of the households say we can deal with our own home, but then it goes out in the lane and makes a big mess. People then were quite excited about this approach, and there was some implementation of drainage improvements as part of the village. Last context was the complex urban centers that we talked about with Lahore. And here, because these cities have such a long record of design, we said, let's take a historical geographic approach, go back, in this case, to the comparison between Lahore and other capitals of the Mughal Empire at that time, 16th century, 17th century, when they're first being designed formally, and start to draw some lessons from that history of design and the implications it's had for the current situation. So these are the capitals of the Mughal Empire. Let's look at them comparatively. The first problem that happened, the cities are all being built up, fortifications made. Next slide, if you can. And unfortunately, over time, over the period of a century or so, the channels began to migrate away from the city center. So you have here a distance of almost a kilometer between the city center and the channel. And then the patterns of floodplain development start to kind of fill that space. And you have more vulnerable settlement between the historic citadel and the so that's what happens when you have the channels migrating away from you. Let's go to the next slide and see that in the Agra context on the left here, channel is very stable, which is a good thing. But nevertheless, the fluctuating flows over time, even with the mobile masonry, which I can tell you is more staggeringly powerful than what we build today, even so, you had the collapse of structures along the Agua riverfront over time. And a more adaptive type of pattern of riverfront development you see in some other cities, Mathura upstream, Varanasi on the Ganges, involves the development of steps, which were constructed mainly for ritual bathing and religious practices. But they accommodate the rising and diminishing flows of the river up to a point, because even those cities are now flooding along the riverfronts as well. If you look at the history, or rather the map of the pre-colonial settlement in Lahore, and look at the old river terraces here in a dashed line, all of the pre-colonial structures are on the old riverfront or behind. Anything that was built in the floodplain is now a ruin. And so that's a real lesson for what pre-colonial settlement geography looked like. In the colonial times, go to the next slide, we've had some attempts to do river control through all kinds of river training works. And we'll hear more about some of the current efforts of that sort, but they were largely ineffective for the large, low frequency, high magnitude events, the big floods. So they were good at smaller types of control, but poor at larger. And that produces what's called the levee effect. Gilbert White and others said, you protect against the ordinary hazard and you become more vulnerable to the larger event. Let's go to the next slide, because in the post-colonial times, we have yet another set of hazards that come in that in the treaty, the partition of water as well as land between India and Pakistan. The treaty allocated the Ravi River to India. And while there was some redirecting of the flows from link canals to the irrigated lands under the Ravi, the channel itself has had this diminishing set of discharge over time. So it's becoming depleted and degraded, but still flood prone. It's a bad combination. And the monsoon precipitation helps explain why it's becoming more flood prone. And so it's in this context that we're asking, what's the range of choice? What's the range of design alternatives as well as planning and policy alternatives? The last slide. And we have a number of options that have been generated recently. One by a government agency, the Urban Development Authority, but it's highly concentrated, intensively developing the floodplain. And there was an eco revitalization scheme that the Asian Development Bank proposed. There's new alternatives that are being kind of considered as we speak. And it was with this kind of rhetorical question of, what's the range of choice here, that I thought I would hand off to my colleague, Bamaz, so that he could help to address and take us forward. Thanks very much, folks. It's a pleasure to visit with you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jim. Now we move to Gamaz, who's going to give us a contemporary perspective on how things are proceeding. Zoom colleagues, can you see everything all right? I think so. It's good.
Have like a remote with which I can operate, or?
Unfortunately not. So you just have to keep telling me,
Okay.
because
Okay.
Or the other thing you can do is you can use this downward arrow if you want to have more control.
Yeah, sure,
That's
sure.
fine. You can do that and I can move over there. Yep. So just keep track of the Zoom plans, because in case there is some issue. I don't think there is. Yep, okay, all right, thank you.
So, good afternoon, everyone. You guys have had a pretty, decent overview of what actually River Ravi is. Now let's try to visualize that a little bit and try to also understand the mechanics of how how this particular project and how projects of such nature actually, get planned, and how they, despite the risk, despite many studies that might not go in the favor of the project, they still persevere and they still get built. Even prior to this presentation, we were also talking about different geographies in the world where we know that the risk perception is really low, but the climate change patterns are really showing that it's not really wise to build in certain areas. So this might serve as an example of that. First, let me just show you guys a little bit. So this is like the flyer and the participants that we had for the seminar that we conducted at the Bickenhouse National University. And the effort was to not only explore the Ravi Urban Development Project, but also to have different stakeholders sit on a table and really try to voice their concerns. So we had people from, we had a commercial law expert, we had the CEO of Ravi Urban Development Authority, then we also had some economists and environmentalists, and lastly, the Director General of WWF. So these are some of the videos that I can share the link with if any one of you would like to know further about a particular subject. So what exactly is the project, or the claim to fame of this project is that it's the world's largest riparian development. It's 46 kilometers in total length. And this is like a chart, and we can get back to it, but personally, I think it would help us to really understand that what exactly is the governance structure of Pakistan. So it's a three-tier governance structure. There's a local tier, the provincial one, and then there's the federal tier. So Ravi Urban Development Project is a classic example of a top-down approach, and we kind of see that because the project was first declared non-viable by the Lahore High Court, and then it was conditionally approved by the Supreme Court. And then the story kind of goes from there to land acquisition and other issues. Sorry, I think there's some sort of issues with the order of it.
Really? Okay. Is it, oh, was there a blank? No?
No, I mean, we're supposed to be on that slide.
This one? Okay. There's some kind of blank one, or why don't some are blank, it seems.
Can I just
Yeah. Here we
escape
can
and
see. Oh, some of the pictures are not showing up. They didn't transfer.
okay, let me just take a look.
Only a few are missing.
Yeah, so I think I can just make the most out of what we have right now.
Okay.
Okay.
So we start with this one.
Yeah,
Okay, all
yeah.
right, good. There we go.
Okay, so let's try to understand the topography of that. So as the Professor Westcott mentioned, that Ravi is after the Indus Water Treaty, which basically was an agreement between India and Pakistan and how to use the water channels, and essentially from the Himalayas to rivers flow. One is the river Indus, and the other is Ganges. Indus is you can say Indus flows directly to Pakistan, and Ganges goes to India. But like they say that there are upper riparians and then there are upper riparians. There are lower riparians and then there are lower riparians. So really we need to sort of have a broader and more micro view of how these water channels actually flow. So
I just have to make a shift on Zoom because they're having trouble seeing what I would, sometimes, their Zoom is very quirky. I have to go back and share the screen again.
you know the most popular phrase from the pandemic was, "Can you hear me?"
Yeah. Okay, so
Live in
now,
5 years, we still live.
there we go. All right, I think now it should be all right. Now we go to. It's not letting me. Oh, it. Then this thing, I have to close this. That should do it.
I just double check.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Okay, so. So let's actually try to understand what Lahore is right now. Um, this, this basically side of the river is the current Lahore with a population of 22 million individuals. Pakistan is the fourth or fifth most populous city, no, populous country in the world with a population of 240 million individuals. And with the geographic size of it, it's like half of Europe is in twice of Italy, basically. And Lahore is, given the population that we already have, it wouldn't be, it shouldn't come as a surprise that we are also running out of natural resources and water being at the forefront of it. And having a twin city right next to it might not be a very wise idea to begin with. But the rationale there is to also sort of create an embankment along Ravi. And once you have an embankment, it can, there's also opportunity to have housing there. There's also opportunity to commercialize that space. And riverfronts are very popular, throughout the world. So Ravi, can expand on that particular feature. So this area which you see in the, which is outlined in the grid, that's basically is going to be the area that is going to be developed under the Ravi Urban Development Authority. And with the equivalent of an executive order, there's the Luna Act that was put into place, which gives the Ravi Urban Development Authority the powers to surpass the local tier of the government and not follow many of the procedural, you can say, requirements that that have to be met when you acquire land or you expropriate land. So the first sort of contentious issue is of land acquisition and human rights. So when we look at the total area of the land, it's 140,000 acres. So and it's going to house 4 to 5 million individuals. So 4,000 acres of that, according to the Human Rights Watch and the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, is in dispute. And then you also have cases of forced evictions and inadequate compensation. So how do you really value a particular piece of land, and do you provide the appropriate value of to the farmer or to any other landowner? That's another huge concern. And then there's the alleged collusion with the developers, bypassing of the bureaucratic procedures. And then there's also some of the things that I deliberately put in the human rights violation, because if you look at the environmental impact assessment reports that were submitted, they proved to be insufficient for the project to be pushed forward, and that is why you first had the Lahore High Court declare it sort of unviable. And after that, you also had a lack of master planning. So a master plan, for those of us who are architecture or landscape students, we know that a master plan is an abstract exercise. A master plan, by and large, it's presentation of a scenario that, and oftentimes it's very seductive. Look at the renders that we show to people, and look at the cities that we, market, and the cities that actually become. So it's also a very political tool. So master plan in this case was not entirely there because it's a huge area, and they said that, okay, we can provide you with an outline, but we won't be able to give you like the, each and every detail and the environmental impact and social impact reports along with that. Because they had to, the government had a particular period to operate in and push the forward, they did that, and after that, we had cases that are of human rights violation, basically. And then you look at the socioeconomic concerns of this particular project as well. There's, much like the Hudson Yards in the New York, or, if you look at many other developments in Dubai and other places, in London as well, and you compare that with the homelessness and the unaffordability, it's also very difficult to sort of reconcile with the equitable side of things. What's gonna become of the urban villages? There are 73 different villages that are in this 140 acre, 40,000 acres worth of land. How will they be integrated? That's a huge concern. Then there's the displacement of the agricultural communities, because most of this land is agricultural. So how do you compensate that? And then there are protected forests. And the WWF, Pakistan is up in arms and, really fighting certain cases against Rabi Urban Development Authority to protect those lands and to not make them, part of their larger sort of parks and so on, because they're not meant for recreation, they are to be preserved. So, I want to expand a little bit on the environmental side of things, because we don't have everyday kind of environmental concerns. As you can see, Lahore is one of the most, it's actually the most polluted air quality that we have in the world. Delhi is on the second. And this chart, by the way, the air quality index is almost 2 years old, I think. And last year we had an AQI which was past 1800. And it is, you have to experience it to really feel what actually it is like to breathe in such an environment. Now, obviously, as soon as I say that, people generally think that we are not really taking care of our air quality, and there are certain measures that we need to have on a city level. But actually, Pakistan contributes to less than 1%, 0.8% to the overall global greenhouse gas emissions. So how do we really reconcile development? We can't really stop that, but at the same time, we also have a huge air quality concern. So adding another mega city next to a mega city as a twin city really might not be the best of ideas. So there is no particular answer to this question. Delhi does not have that, and almost 10 of these cities, they don't really have an answer to this question right now. So these are some of the photographs from our site visits. As you can see, the work is in full swing, and many of the private developments here, like this is one of the, you can say, newsletter, an image from the newsletter of one of the private developments, which is called Shahadbad. And it's 81%, done. It's a gated community, basically. So you have a 30 years, project, 5 years, and they're already a little bit ahead of the schedule. And you really start to sort of question that why is the government so keen on actually finishing this project, or why is the government so keen on, delivering all of these? And I think that it's the story in most of the urban development projects is not about this particular bit that we see here, which is the water. The story is much more about these that actually, are implanted in certain environments, which is basically housing, which is the commercial markets and so on. So from here to here, what exactly is the motivation that the government has? One is, of course, there's the legacy element of it. For instance, we were just talking prior to this discussion that Olympics, for instance, global expos, even the World Cup, they're not profitable to almost any city except from one or two exceptions. So why do cities really opt for it? Why do cities, create a lot of congestion, inconvenience for its citizens and so on? Well, it's a matter of legacy, right? So having the world's largest riparian development would mean a lot for a city like Pakistan. And then it's a 5 trillion Pakistani rupees project, which is worth, I think, $3 to $4 billion. Which is quite a lot for a city and an economy like Lahore. And it is going to change 4 to 5 million lives of 4 to 5 million residents, or it might change lives for the rest of the 22 million. We're yet to find out. Yeah, the image is kind of missing. I'm not really sure why, so apologies for that. But I thought it might be, with this sort of very neutral perspective of what our workshop, entailed, and what are some of the findings. It might help to look at our neighbors and try to see that within the last 20 years, what are some of the other projects that were successful, if they were at all. So we do see this. This first example is of the Yamuna River front project, and we have an image now. But it's basically around 5,000 acres. So it's minuscule in comparison to the Ravi Urban Development Project. But over there, we have similar concerns. Quite similar actually, where you have forced evictions, where you also have inadequate compensation. The compensation element is because we have a shared colonial history. And within that, the Land Acquisition Act of Pakistan is from 1894. Which basically says that, you have to have a flat DC rate, which is basically the deputy commissioner rate. And what that rate is, that it's a parallel, you can say, valuation system. For instance, this particular building could be of $2 million in the private market, but the district commissioner rate might say that it's $50,000. And when the government has to take over this building, it has to expropriate, or it might it might not be meant for public use, but the government might decide that, okay, we are going to take it away from you, demolish it, and then sell this land to someone else so they can build something better. It's going to acquire at that flat rate. So, and also, there's coercion, there's actually there's actually this element that you cannot really challenge the state, because if you really do, then the chances are that they will make the rest of the procedural or the rest of the selling process for you very, very difficult, because you'll be isolated and your neighbors are just waiting to sell the land and make some money because it was agricultural land and now they're getting paid better in some cases. And those who actually try to fight, they're sort of forced out of it. So the next project that we have is the Sabarmati, riverfront project in Ahmedabad. And over here, we don't really have the air quality concern. That's one difference, and that's one thing common between Delhi and Lahore. Over here, we still have a lot of ecological damage. I mean, if we talk about Karachi, we see that many instances of Karachi, which is a coastal city, they cut down the mangrove, forest, and they said that, okay, it would be better to have like sort of, riverfront walkways, and, to prevent flooding and so on, will create three-step kind of thing. So on a nice sunny day, you can walk on the lowermost step, and on a day where it might be flooding, you can be on the top step. So these are the kind of also choices where you sort of part ways with the natural buffers that prevent disaster, and you really try to capitalize or commercialize rather, these kinds of spaces. And again, you have no rehabilitation plan. I mean, there's this anecdote that we shared in architecture schools, that if you go back home and if you find out that someone broke into your house and took all of your stuff, in the evening, you receive a call from the police officer. Now, obviously, you're devastated. All of this stuff is gone. The police officer says that, hey, we found your stuff. You can come to the station and take it all back. So you take back all of your stuff. You really recover from that experience, but do you really heal from that experience? So I think there are many aspects to rehabilitation, which is not just, it's not just about economics, of course, it's about the neighborhood, it's about many other sort of aspects that might not be compensated by just having a few bucks in your pocket, And then the last project is of Hathi Ji in Dhaka, which was quite a successful project. But here we have certain issues that are related to pollution and maintenance. So like Professor mentioned that you might be able to build all of this, but the other side of it is gonna be like, who's gonna take care of the metabolism of that particular city? Do you have enough water to actually provide to the citizens, to the 4 to 5 million people that are going to come there to have their lives changed? Will they have enough drinking water? Will they have, adequate sanitation? So that's another concern that we find with this riverfront project. And then forced evictions, that remains a common thread among the three. And then, of course, the ecological damage, because having like concrete and all of these walkways is just not a natural buffer. And you had the city in this place because it survived for many years, and it did so without having these kind of man-made structures. So some of the policy recommendations that we thought about, and there was this article in Forbes that Professor Salim here wrote, and these policy recommendations essentially have to do with a transparent land acquisition process. The second component is of inclusive government reforms, which talk about, empowerment of the local government and having a monitoring and evaluation framework, and then certain bottom-up planning approaches. And then you also have the sustainable urban planning bit, and it's not just like a general term. It's in this particular case, we also have to evaluate the reduced risk perception, like the levee effect that we talked about earlier. Now people are going to be, moving closer and closer to the river. And then we also see with climate change, the rainfalls are going to increase. For instance, the 2022 floods that we talked about earlier, it wiped out 30% of Pakistan's infrastructure. More than 33 million people were affected by those floods, and those were flash floods. So what's going to happen if you have a similar situation in this particular area, and now people are sort of, they're paying millions of dollars to basically live close to the riverfront. So but to sort of just conclude and, make a way to open up the conversation, some of the elements that we want to take away from this project is that it's a high stakes project, and it's either the future or the end of Lahore as I see it, because it's not going to be much of a city if the air quality continues to worsen. There isn't going to be any water left for us if the construction is going to take a lot of water, and then people have to use it for their daily chores and so on, and then people have to use it for drinking. The underground water is depleting day in and day out of Lahore, so what's going to become of that? And it's basically like a contest that we now feel like between ecology and development, and how do you balance the both? And lastly, you have it as the second mega project after China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So this particular project is going to sort of set a precedent for not just riparian developments, but also for top-down sort of imposed projects, and how do you really go about that, and land acquisition, and really snubbing the rights and so on also follow. And then you also have opportunity here to make it like a pilot project for future mega projects. Some of the recommendations, like Professor mentioned earlier, that I'm not really sure what firm is responsible for providing those plans, because first they thought that, okay, we are going to have islands in between the river, and now they're talking about this straight sort of flow of the river and not having those islands, which I think was a good decision. So there are some recommendations that are being shared by different consultancies and different public-private environmentalist groups. So it's a project that we are yet to sort of see the end of. But I would just like to, the reason that I draw your attention to some of the policy elements and related to governance and expropriation. I would like to end with this, which is a quote by Henry Lefebvre. Space is not scientific. Space is not a scientific object removed from ideology or politics. It has been political and strategic. There is an ideology of space, because space, which seems homogeneous, which appears as a whole in its objectivity, in its pure form, such as we determine it, is a social product. Thank you, and sorry.
Over to our moderator, please.
Yeah, so I'm gonna look for questions in a few minutes, but I'm gonna start by putting some questions for discussion up here. So start thinking about your question ideas, but you have a few minutes. Yeah. So thank you for both of these, and I've been trying to figure out how to articulate this better, but I think one of the really interesting themes of running through all of this is kind of. We have a lot of choices to think about Bill of Rights range of choices. There's a lot of choices about how to design cities and how they're designed. But a lot of the work you're both describing is also questioning where. Right, not just how we build, but where do we build? And where do we rebuild? And where do we double down? Where do we move away from? And so there's something interesting about this threshold of when is it too risky? And I was struck as you were talking about the water issue, that when you plan a city for 5 million people, you don't have to think about where the drinking water will come from. But when you think about relocating your village 300 meters up a cliff, you have to think about where the drinking water will come from and design a solution. And in some ways, maybe it's a bad idea to move a town to a place where there's no accessible drinking water. And maybe it's a bad idea to build anyway, so there's something interesting about at what level we think, hey, we have to solve this problem, or the development is too big. We assume it'll solve itself. Anyway, I'm curious how you have both, have you seen discussions around, how did the discussion play out around where we build? Is there a discussion with the Ravi River on, how did that discussion go on should we build, where should we build? I guess I'm kind of curious about how people are thinking of this question of where, not just how, but where do we build in the first place?
Right, okay, I can start and then head off, but the question is perennial, and anyone in design practice has this feeling and question all the time on every project. You're asking, should we do this project? Should we do it the way the client wants it? Should we kind of ask the client to rethink it? Should we actually step away and not do the project? Just part of what it means to be a designer. In the case of the Tajikistan study, the village had a consensus that we confirmed it with private interviews and everything. We want to move and we want to move there. Can you help us?
Okay.
And so we said, okay, in this context, we don't have these displacement issues. We have just the opposite situation, which is rare. But nevertheless, it allowed us to explore some of these questions of whether that was viable or not. And some of the options that we generated were clearly not feasible. But we could say that some